Getting bigger by being better. The number one choice for Bristol. This is BCFM 93.2.
OK, on to the airliner then, MH370, Martin. This is a pretty shocking story, and I mean, the problem seems to be that we've got British companies, one of the problems anyway, pontificating on what's going on out there in the Indian Ocean. We've got two companies, both one is Intelsat, that's the satellite people. Another one is the Air Accident Investigation Branch, and it seems that the Malaysian government are taking advice from them as to where this aircraft is, or if it's crashed or if it's not. I mean, I would simply say, now we know that the aircraft travelled on for 5 hours after it was originally supposed to have been lost. Aircraft do not just travel for 5 hours and then crash, losing all people on board. It just doesn't happen. An aircraft can quite easily ditch in the ocean, and if so, you will obviously get quite a lot of wreckage, and you will get life rafts, some survivors. But why is it that we're being told that this aircraft has just simply disappeared? I just find it impossible to believe, as do the families of the people who are on that aircraft. One thing that people are looking at is a potential cyber hijack. In fact, the British anti-terror expert Dr. Sally Leversley said literally straight away after, this is on Sunday the 16th of March, that she said the hackers could change the plane's speed. She was thinking that that it was the world's first cyber hijack. They can change the plane's speed, altitude and direction by sending radio signals to its flight management system. It could then be landed or made to crash by remote control. Possible culprits include criminal gangs, terrorists or a foreign power. And now that means just about any military, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, the Global Hawk technology has existed since the 1970s, and the US flew an airliner across the Pacific and landed in Australia without a pilot, even in the 1970s. And if you look at the movements of the 4 hijacked aeroplanes on 9/11, they didn't fly directly to their targets. They flew in very bizarre zigzag patterns across the United States airspace, without being intercepted by the United States Air Force, it might be added, and they were probably, in my view, flown from the ground using Global Hawk technology. Well, and if you think about it, modern technology with everything on computers, it's all hackable. The Iranians have taken down US drones through hacking them. Hezbollah in Lebanon managed to hack into the Israeli drones, and therefore
now, there's a problem with this technology. There's a problem with discussing this technology even on the news for many of the powers that use it, and that is that it's secret military technology. They don't really want this kind of stuff to be going out to Joe Public and be chit-chatting about it here, there and everywhere. So that's one aspect of this. Another thing is that, I mean, I have looked at the avalanche of denials on certain stories. I mean, for example, when Rolls Royce first announced that they believed that the plane had flown on for several hours afterwards, what we got was so much in the way of denials from all of the various countries involved, not actually, I don't think, from China, but certainly from Malaysia, who are taking their information more from the West, that we were being told, no, actually Rolls-Royce didn't get this information. They even managed to get a retraction from Rolls-Royce itself. Now this has since proved to be the case, that it certainly did fly on for 4 or 5 hours, and so when I see a massive denials about by people that actually don't know what happened, I get very suspicious that news management is going on around the world. And of course there are really only a handful of big corporations that control a fantastic amount of the news that we see and hear every day nowadays. The other thing is the Maldives story. There was a story came out in a little Maldives newspaper last week. Again, if you were to look that story up on the internet anywhere, all you will find is 50, and I don't kid you, 50 denials that the story was true. Now, how can all the people who were denying whether these people had seen this aircraft in the Maldives have even known whether they'd seen it or not? So I get very suspicious about news management, and I just wonder, Martin, your thoughts about whether you think that might be taking place here. And this is one of the reasons, well, obviously, why these families are getting so angry. Now, they are now actually suing the Malaysian government.
Well, I think you're quite right to suspect that news management is going on around this incident. It's an extremely mysterious incident. For example, it's quite clear that people phoned the mobile phones of people on the planes, and the phones rang but nobody answered.
Yeah, that was broadcast live on Malaysian television. Yeah. People actually phoning the phones. It didn't go to voicemail. It didn't say this number's disconnected. It actually rang.
I would say that I don't know what happened here. But
if that's the case, surely the NSA will be able to trace that and find out where it is.
Indeed, somebody does know. People like the NSA and GCHQ probably know exactly what's happened here, but we don't.
And the problem is, of course, the families are being told, well, you can mourn for your loved ones, but we can't give you any wreckage or bodies.
Yes, and we don't really know what's happened, and the plane may, in fact, be... I mean, one theory I saw that the plane may be being cut up for spare parts. It may be an act of piracy, or it may have some political implications, as you were suggesting earlier. It's hard to guess,
now,
isn't it?
let's look at... I mean, the sort of people who are suffering are a lot of the families, obviously. There are 239 passengers and crew on there, so there's many, many people suffering in that way. But there's also... The Malaysian government has suffered a blow as well, hasn't it? And the Chinese government has suffered a blow with this. Are there any motives for anybody to be threatening or wanting to prod the Malaysian government? Tell us a bit about Malaysia. What kind of country is it, and how does it fit into the global context?
Well, the former president of Malaysia, Mahathir Mohamad, is a fairly outspoken character. He's actually, for example, he had 9/11 conferences held in Malaysia questioning the official story. During the 1998 Asian financial crisis, the Malaysians refused IMF advice not to put on exchange controls. They put on exchange controls rather successfully and managed to stabilise the crisis in Malaysia. So traditionally, Malaysia, a largely Muslim country, has been a thorn in the flesh, I'll put it no stronger than that, of the establishment in the West. And of course China is regarded as a number one rival and threat. So it may be that the message is being sent to the leadership in Malaysia and China, or it may be something else entirely. I mean, I don't think we should jump to conclusions, but that's a possibility.
Well, going back to the cyber hijack theory, which is, I must admit, my favourite one, at least I think it's probably the most credible, is last April, German security consultant Hugo Tissot, who is also a commercial pilot, unveiled a way to hijack a plane remotely using a phone. And it has to be said that the 777 was the first aircraft in production where the pilots didn't have any kind of direct control at all of any of the controls of the plane. Addressing the Hack in the Box Security Summit in Amsterdam last May, he said he had spent 3 years developing a series of malicious codes on a mobile phone app called Plane Spoil that hacked into an aircraft's security system right into the plane. That's using an Android phone.
Yes, so I mean, initially this kind of technology of hacking into airliners and crashing them into buildings probably only, for example, only in the hands of states, because they're the only ones who are big enough to develop.
Well, militaries.
Yeah. But what's beginning to happen, of course, is that these technologies inevitably start to spread.
I mean, is it this simple that Boeing actually don't want to admit this, or they don't want to engage with it? I mean, Boeing obviously don't want people worried that some kid is going to be sitting on a phone below the plane hacking into it.
Well, if I was the Russian or Chinese militaries, I'd make sure that all of my planes had manual override. It's an obvious thing to do. And if I was NATO, I would insist on the same as well. But of course, in actual fact, with the increasing cyberneticization of warfare, that's not the case. But of course, what the whole drone business is quite interesting in this context, because the Iranians and Hezbollah in Lebanon have managed to hack into Israeli and American drones. And of course, they don't really want to give away at what level they've hacked into them, because it could be, for example, that hundreds of drones are sent to whack Iran, and the Iranians just send them all back to base to blow up where they were sent from.
Okay,
if they've hacked into it effectively.
On the timing of this, 3 weeks ago tomorrow, disappearance of MH370, the aircraft. Martin, it was around about the same time as the vote was being taken at the United Nations Security Council over whether there should be action against Russia with regard to Crimea. Now, the Chinese, I would say quite wisely, completely abstained on that vote. Do you think there may have been pressure on them to vote against Russia?
Well, there was pressure on them to vote against Russia for sure. I mean, we've had the UN vote this week where lots of countries, the Russians are complaining that lots of countries basically have their arms twisted. You know, you support us on this, or we're going to cut off your credit line, cut off your insulin supply, make life difficult for you. So, yes, there could be pressure. And don't forget that what seems to be happening in Ukraine is also happening simultaneously in Venezuela. There's an attempt to overthrow the Maduro government in Venezuela. And I suggest that we are, in fact, seeing a a rollout of a gameplay by NATO all over the world, not just in Ukraine.
So do you think there's any real motive for an attack on Malaysia or China, almost out of the blue?
Well, I suggest to you that Malaysia and China are seen as part of the awkward squad, as are Venezuela and other similar countries. That doesn't mean that we can jump to conclusions about what's happened here. It's too complicated to say.
Getting bigger by being better. The number one choice for Bristol. This is BCFM 93.2.
Well, back to the bad old days this week of US-sponsored military rule in Egypt after the halcyon days of the Arab Spring.